Welcome to the unexplored dimensions of Paranormal M, where we share stories that blur the line between reality and the supernatural. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to be part of our journey into the unknown. The most sinister entity I've ever encountered. As a clairvoyant, I've had my fair share of weird and wonderful encounters with spirits and entities. Most have been good, some bad, but I've only ever dealt with a few evil ones. This is a fairly long read detailing my encounters with the witch who tormented me for 5 years in the most horrendous ways. I do not know how she found me, or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub. The ceilings were low, and it had that fusty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet rural lane surrounded by hedgerows, and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There was 2 sections to the pub. One side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture, admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau, when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack, and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong, and I had the feeling of being circled by a predator. One I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid, an old dusty chest of drawers. And I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to flame. Slowly, leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, my face came into view of another face looming down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful if not cold-looking. Pale blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes, young, no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face into a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling was coming from within that cavernous abyss. I've never felt a fear like it, the sort which strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream, I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up, sweating, and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I've never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare, in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came, and as I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants, I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face, full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I'd encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm in an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain is what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none in the area, it was red as if it had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams, that she was a separate entity, not some reoccurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I psychically saw snippets of hers. She had a knack for showing herself. And she would do this in two different ways. One, the young, beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous, deformed mouth. And others, a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out that she was a Dreamwalker, as I called this gift, not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was just standing by my bed, and she was wrapped around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe, until I woke up violently gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off work, I woke up and I was feeling lazy. I decided to lounge in bed a little longer, and I was in and out of sleep until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her." So I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow. And then something peculiar happened. As if I was stood in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed covered up and face down, and hovering about 2 feet above my body parallel to me, there was an opaque brown swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleep, half-awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lie there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down. There were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie, to say the least, and not something I was used to as having random spirits popping in and out. They've been popping in and out of my life for years, since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know that she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was laying in bed, and in this dream, I woke, and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with it held me in place, scared shitless of what was going to happen next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of my bed, slowly worked its way up over my body until she was on top of me and her face was in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin, and she smelt of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone," she hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly, the quilt dropped back onto the bed and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which is usually cocooning myself, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with the window that looked out onto the street. I refused to sleep at my home that next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I've ever had with her was odd, to say the least, as it seems as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream I awoke, and she had me by the throat, both of us dangling the air over my bed. Here she was her younger self with porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look that she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust. I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. It felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. The last I ever saw her, and hopefully ever will, I questioned myself early whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I don't know if that wasn't it. I've never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just didn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart, or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubt she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she's passed over with them the same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me. The Bone Pit. It was in the country, a small village, and the house was on a council estate. We had a row of garages behind our garden, where people on the estate could park their cars, with a few little secretive cubby holes and dens that were hidden by trees and thickets. A kid's dream. The very end garage owned by a local creepy bloke, and it had been vandalized. Somebody had spray-painted Red Rum, believe it, onto his garage door. I never knew what red rum meant back then. One warm day, about a year after moving in, we were all 11 and my sister 6, a small group of us, consisting of me, my sister, my best friend Gemma, next-door neighbor Kiri, and her cousin Michael were hanging out in one of our dens, shaded by trees, just mucking around as kids do beside the vandalized garage. Michael, being a bit of a class clown, was just stood up doing an impression of one of our more larger teachers at school. My attention was drawn to the ground, where he was standing. The solid, smooth dirt appeared to be moving like fluid. It looked like it was rippling like water. It was the strangest thing. I think it was only me that saw this, none of the others. At least none of the others confirmed what I was witnessing anyway. What came out of my mouth next was even stranger. "We need to dig there," I told them. I couldn't explain what was compelling me to say this. "Something's under there." I continued. They all just looked at me and just started asking why. I couldn't give them an answer. Besides, "We just need to. Something is buried there." I think boredom and just looking for adventure convinced my friends and my sister. They just went along with me, so we found sticks. I had my sister go and pinch 2 spoons from our house, which was only yards away. We began digging in silence, this little circle of mud. They must have thought I was mad, I couldn't explain it. I just knew that there was something under there. Kiri stops because she's dislodged something hard a few inches long. We scrape the dirt off with one of the spoons. We can see it's a bone. One end is all sharp and jagged like it's been snapped. We look at each other a bit spooked, but decide to keep digging to look for more. It's probably an animal bone, Michael tells us. But this weird feeling had come over our little group. Finding more bones the deeper that we go and collect this little morbid pile and start digging a wider circle. But our friends start to dry up. I think there was about 15 bones, roughly. Some were a fair size, others small and broken. We gathered them up, and I remember putting them in a sandwich bag and taking them to school the following Monday. I plonked them on the teacher's desk and informed her that we had found all these bones near my house. I will always remember her face. Like, are these kids for real? Get these gross bones off my desk. She told us that they were probably just animal bones and to put them under her desk. I'm sure they probably went in a bin after we left that day. That's probably all they were. But I think it's curious that if I hadn't seen the ground moving like that we never would have found them. And the fact it was next to the creep's garage didn't help. I only learned a couple of years later that red rum was murder backwards. A bit slow to catch on. I know, but it does make me wonder if someone knew something about him. We never heard any more about it. Little did I know it was the start of something far more terrifying and long-lasting. Possible time loop. Any explanations? Roughly 4 years ago, my sister came to my flat one night to spend a bit of time with me, as we had both been working like crazy and hadn't had the time to catch up. It was just the two of us, and she suggested having a game of cards. Something we've always done since kids. It's a favorite pastime in our house. Once I'd gotten the cards out and started shuffling them, she asked me to look at the time on my phone, as she had work the next morning at 7 a.m. and needed to be home for a reasonable time. She had lost her phone on a night out a few days previously, a terrible habit that she has. I told her it was 6:10 in the evening. She replied, "Okay, well, I'll have to be getting off around, 8:15 to 9 to get my uniform washed and dried, so keep an eye on the time for me." I agreed, and we started playing a bit of rummy to start with. Now, we weren't drinking alcohol or taking drugs. We were just having a relaxed game of cards, chatting about guys and work. The usual stuff, I suppose. Everything was normal. We played cards for what felt like 2 hours, easy. I mean, you can't mistake that length of time when you've had about 16 to 18 hands of rummy, and we were in the early stages of playing a game of poker, having gotten bored of the other game. I remember having the weirdest feeling come over me, like the light in the room dimmed, and I distinctly felt an electrical crackly feeling start in the bottom of my spine and creep all the way up to my skull. I looked at her, and she was looking at me all wide-eyed and silent like she knew something was up. I blurted out, "Something's wrong, really wrong." Without blinking or reacting to any which way, she just says to me, "Look at the time," which I thought was strange. I picked up my phone, looked at the time. A mixture of shock and dread creeps over me. "That can't be right. It's not possible," I mumbled out loud to myself, if anything. My phone must have glitched out or something. Getting up to turn on the telly to see what the time's on there. She's looking at me like, what in the hell is going on? "What is it? What's the time?" she asks me again. I just repeat that it can't be right. And as I switch the telly on, the time flashes up in the corner of the screen. It says 18:29. She sees it, and now just as freaked as I am. Amy, that can't be right. Did your phone say the same time? I tell her it did. I pull out a laptop to check the time and even get a watch out of my drawer to see if they're all matched, and sure enough, they did. We just sat there in a bit of a fog, like, what on earth just happened? We tried to discuss it, but we couldn't make any sense of it. To be honest, it felt uncomfortable. Even to this day, to talk about it doesn't feel right. She breaks the silence with a joke, something like, "Oh, well, at least I have another couple of hours to chill with you." We just tried to forget about it. I just wondered if anyone had any ideas as to what it was. Something's living in our family home. A little background. This house was built in 1995 by my dad and mom. It's a big house with 2 floors and a basement. We're the only family that's ever lived there. My grandmother died in the bathroom upstairs in 2010. No one else has died in that house besides her. My sister and brother, who I'm going to be mentioning in this story, had moved out of the house before things ever started happening. I moved out about a year ago. Sorry for the grammar, English is not my mother tongue. It started a few years after Granny had died. We started hearing steps going up and down the stairs at night. We were spooked a little, but forgot about it soon because we just thought it was Granny's ghost, since she's the only one who died there, and we had heard those steps very rarely. Maybe a year passes, and I'm looking through pictures of my relatives, and me having sent to each other on Messenger. I found a screenshot that she had taken when we were on a video call at night, and I saw some weird gray mass behind me. I zoomed in and was completely taken back. There was a gray torso and face behind me in the darkness. I put some filters on it so I could see it better. Cropped it because I had an ugly face on the picture and showed it to my family and friends as soon as possible. Everyone except my dad was completely shocked. My dad didn't believe in paranormal at the time and kept denying when stuff happened. My sister said that the gray apparition looks like Granny, and I agreed. I think I may make a separate post for that picture and put a link here too, not sure yet. Anyway, a few years forward. My mom and dad are downstairs cooking something in the kitchen, and I'm on the second floor in my bedroom sitting on my bed. I hear exactly 3 knocks on my door. It's normal that people knock on my door first before entering, but this time, no one opens the door to enter. I just stare at the door for a while and eventually ask, "Who's there?" I get no answer. I call Mom on the phone because I'm spooked. She said that nobody had gone upstairs. I went on to Google about 3 knocks on a door, and I did not like the answers I found. I panicked a bit and just waited until I felt like enough time had passed that it was safe enough to open the door. I went downstairs and told my mom and dad what happened. Dad didn't believe me like usual, but Mom was a bit spooked. By now, I've also seen shadows walk past my bedroom door. Creepy, but nothing special in my opinion. Again, a few years have passed, and I and my mom have moved out. It's a long story what happened and why we moved, but in short, domestic violence. Only my father lives in that house now. The house is empty and freezing most of the time because we live in Europe, and Father travels a lot due to work. It's been also put on sale. Since I moved out, the activity in the house has increased. My father has told my sister that he's been hearing someone walking around, faucets turning on and off, doors opening, etc. He didn't believe in the paranormal before, but now he's experienced the spookiest of it himself. Yesterday, my sister, Mom, and me had met up at the house while Father was at work to just catch up. At one point, my sister informed me that her and Mom were planning on staying the night there, and asked me if I was staying too. I declined because I hate that house, and it makes me have panic attacks. Well, fast forward to today. Sister called me and told me that she was absolutely never going to stay in that house again because of what happened that night, and I was lucky for choosing to go back home. Apparently, she had stayed up a bit late, and at one point she heard someone walking downstairs fast and going into the garage. She thought it was Mom up late, so she wanted to go check what she was doing. To get downstairs, she had to go past Mom's room, and when she did that, she saw that Mom was sleeping. She was spooked. The steps were fast, so how can it be Granny? She went back to bed and couldn't sleep anymore, so she stayed up. After a while, she heard steps again, but this time in the room next to her. It may not seem scary to you because it's just some steps, but after years of thinking that it was our Granny and then hearing steps that fast, I would have absolutely obliterated my pants and woke up Mom to invisible sword fight the ghost away. My dog came back for a visit. Cutting to the chase. In October, we lost our dog of 13 years. Her name was Bella. And no, I didn't name her after Twilight, though it was in vogue at the time. As a 2-month-old puppy, she witnessed the murder of her then owner. She was one of 6 pups. Ironically, her brother was adopted by my parents' neighbor. They'd ardently play through the chain-link fence whenever we visited home. I raised her in my first year alone at college. She and I were practically attached at the hip. She accompanied me throughout the 6 years it took to get my frickin' degree, marrying my best friend and moving across the country. I'm trying to express the depths of my love for her, and the words just fall short. 5 years ago, I took up the notion that we needed to adopt a sister for her. I think this was a mildly telepathic moment, but she was 8, and I figured it would be a good kind of close out her last years with a companion. Then she started losing her fur and gaining weight. 6 months after adopting our next dog, her name was Arya, Bella went blind. She had cataracts and undergone diabetes. We were told that the $6,000 surgery might not even work, and we're too poor for it anyway. She was insanely intelligent, and after a bout of depression, coped swimmingly. One day her breath became labored, and I knew that our time was almost up. In the 2 days leading up to her death, we were literally attached to the hip once again. I've got a lot of experience with death and knew she was terrified. I held her in my arms as she took her last breath. After she died, I immediately started looking for a puppy. I wasn't trying to replace Bella. I knew that I never could. I'd raised Bella on my own, and Arya was 2 when we adopted her. I thought it would be good to raise a puppy together. It certainly tested my husband's patience. We adopted Lydia 2.5 weeks after Bella died. She's, well, a puppy and a shepherd mix to boot. The only way to calm her down is to wear her out. Today, while I was at work, my husband took her on a walk, which sufficiently tired her. I'd just done yoga and I was meditating. This is now a rarity since Lydia's always crawling on the mat, vying for attention. But today, she sort of sidled up next to me whilst I meditated. I laid down, and with her on the yoga mat, she was the little spoon and I the big one. Bella and I always fell asleep like this together. I was telling Lydia that I loved her and that it was nice to cuddle her, like I'd done with Belly, my nickname for her. Then I talked about how much I missed Belly. As I talked to her and cuddled her, I felt the unmistakable feeling of a dog's nose nudging me on the thigh. I felt there, thinking it was Arya, but she was on the couch. It's nice to know that, even though I can't hold her, my baby's still there. My friend moved in the night and nobody knows how. I grew up in a house that was well over 100 years old when we moved in. For years, I never experienced anything remotely paranormal. But when I was 13, I moved into the basement. On the first night, I didn't sleep. This isn't uncommon because I'm an insomniac, but this was different. My room was pitch black at night because the only window was tiny. I rolled over in the night and heard my inflatable chair. Yes, it was the early 2000s. And I heard it move as if someone was getting out of it. I felt that someone was standing behind me, watching me, and the feeling didn't abate until I started to see the sunrise. I lived in that basement for 7 more years and had a myriad of experiences. I heard a man and woman arguing in the laundry room when no one else was in the home. I'd set 3 alarms. Again, I'm an insomniac. And all 3 would be turned off in the morning. I'd hear whispers in my ear when I was lying on the couch trying to nap. I saw a shadow figure going up and down the back stairs which led to the basement. But the creepiest experience happened when I was 14. If you hadn't gleaned it yet, I have trouble sleeping, and this is mostly because I'm a light sleeper. Literally anything will wake me up. One night, my friends and I were having a sleepover in our basement living room. My 2 friends and my sister slept together on our fold-out couch. I slept on the recliner, which was in front of my bedroom door. When we woke up in the morning, we found that my friend Kirsten, who'd been sleeping in the middle of the other 2, was gone. My parents were still asleep, and we didn't want to wake them, so we searched the house ourselves. All of her stuff was still there. When we didn't find her, I decided to go into my room and call her parents. I moved the recliner, which was still in front of the bedroom door, propped up against it with no wiggle room. There was no other way into my room. I opened the door and there was Kirsten, asleep in my bed. She had no memory of getting up in the night, and she wasn't a sleepwalker. People have tried to tell me that she must have gotten past me, but that's impossible. I would have woken up if she'd even walked past me, let alone she moving the recliner that I was in to open the door. My sister and I still get chills when we talk about it. Odd, ongoing experience in parents' backyard. My parents built their house in 1974 in a very small, very old subdivision in upstate New York. Next door is a 3-level, 3-family home that was built long before theirs, sometime in the late 1800s. This past fall, my son and I were raking leaves on an unusually warm Saturday afternoon. I enjoyed telling my son about all the trees that are still up and how my friends and I used to use them as bases while playing wiffle ball or kickball back there. My parents don't have acreage, but they do have a pretty sizable backyard. While clearing an area by a tree found close to the back corner of the yard, I came across what appeared to be a small broom. It was severely rusted and seemed to literally be coming out of the tree as the tree seems to be shedding some of its bark. It was very strange. I couldn't believe that it was there for a long time. Someone would have seen it somehow. Anyway, I picked it up and started to feel the bristles. They literally fell out as strings of dirt and just became part of the ground at that point. We took the remnants of it inside to show my mom. She and my dad, who passed away nearly 10 years ago, used to live in that house next door when my grandparents owned it. During that time, she said that the Wheelers, a family living in the first floor of the house at the same time, used to work on cars in that exact same spot before they built the house and put a fence up and so forth. We chatted for a while, threw the old broom away, and finished raking the yard. Ever since that day, my 2 to 3-year-old golden doodle, literally sprints, beelines like there's a squirrel there, back to the same exact spot as soon as we get to my mom's house, barks when she gets behind the tree, stops abruptly, wags her tail uncontrollably, and then nonchalantly strolls through the yard to find a stick, do her business or whatever it is she feels like doing. Never happened prior to that day, and now we just laugh because it's her thing to do when we get there. My very own guardian angel, or so I thought. When I was 11 or 12, my family moved to a house in some woods pretty close to town. It was a lodge, a wooden house. My 2 brothers, sisters, and dad. My mom was in another similar house next to ours, as there wasn't enough space. In the first few days, it seemed good, safe, and even freer than usual. My dad worked on evenings, so we'd be alone in our room doing homework, chatting, and normal stuff. One evening, my dad was going to stay till morning, so me and my brother got his room. We were in the bed, trying to sleep. It was about 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps next to the bedroom. I thought it was my sister, so I yelled, "Go to sleep, Sarah." No response. The footsteps got closer to the door and it slowly opened. There was no one there. Then I heard footsteps next to the bed. I wasn't scared. I felt safe. I felt like whatever that was just checking up on me to see if I was okay. Footsteps stopped and the door closed. I fell asleep with a smile. I felt safer than ever. My dad came in the morning and I was already awake watching TV on the couch. My dad asked me, "Did Mom check up on you during the night as I told her?" And I found it being a strange opportunity. I answered, "No, someone else did." My dad was confused, so he asked me who it was, and I said I didn't know. We had a short laugh. The next night, everything over again. Dad stayed at work until morning. This time, I purposely stayed up to repeat like last night. I heard a loud bang on the other side of the wall to my left. I screamed, and that woke up my brother. "Josh, what the hell just banged so fucking loud?" "I don't know, just check." I was excited. "Josh, are you sane? It's 2 a.m. "I know, but I really want to know what it was." "Okay, let's go. I'm going to be first in case someone broke in." He grabbed a random broom from next to the door and we went there. There was nothing, and everything was in place. I heard footsteps coming towards Dad's room's door. "Wait!" I yelled, knowing my brother heard it too. "Josh, who are you talking to?" "I don't know, but I hear footsteps coming to our room like last night." Whatever it was next to me, checking up on me. "Are you sane, really?" No, I believe you, but there's certainly a ghost in here, something." We rushed to the room and went to bed. I suddenly felt unsafe, really endangered. I felt like a sniper scope watched me. It felt so wrong. I felt safe the last time, right? The feeling of fright went through my body, and suddenly a smell of blood, like something had just died. I fell asleep as if someone just strangled me. I wake up in the morning and go to make a sandwich as I was starving. I saw something run to the kitchen before me, and I hear a thump as if someone fell. "Sarah, Mike, Ian, Dad, Who's there? You okay? Then I stopped. No one there. I heard the breathing of about 5 people around me. I turned, saying names of my family. My dad walks in. You called, Bud? You need something? No, Dad. Is Mom here? No, she's over at her house. Okay, Then I told him what was happening. He said he believed me, so we sold the houses and moved. Since then, I felt safe. I prayed every morning for 3 years. I was terrified. Now I'm 21 years old. Still talk with Sarah and Ian. Not Mike, he died in a house fire. I want to ask about something weird that happened to me when I was 10. I used to live in Libya, in Tripoli, to be exact. Libya is a really rural country, but I lived in the city, which is like the suburbs in America. My mom's aunt lived in the street next to us. I always went there with my sisters to play with my mom's cousin's children. There were 3 girls, 12, 11, and 2 years old at that time. I was 10, and my sisters were younger than me. I remember we were playing hide and seek. When we were about to start, the oldest of the girls just stopped talking. She looked at us and said, "Hide," but not as in the game, but in real life. She said we have to all hide together. It was just me and my sister, and her younger sister. We hid behind a car and said that we have to peek at the rest of the street. We all looked. Then out of nowhere, the whole area we were in was empty with no people or cars. To be honest, it always didn't kind of have a lot of people, but at that time of day, which was the evening, it should have a bit of people and cars, but there wasn't any. We waited for a minute, and she said that we have to make no sound. And then a yellow Camaro came and started doing donuts. I know this might sound kind of weird. To make it even weirder, in Libya, we don't have expensive cars, and a Camaro was really rare to see. After that, I remember me and my sister running home scared. I told our parents, but they didn't think it was weird or anything. What made me scared was how the girls I was playing with, especially the oldest, was acting. She was looking at the car and was waiting for it like she knew it was going to happen. Now, the thing that made me post this and made me remember this whole thing is she was the oldest, and she died yesterday because of a car accident. A yellow Camaro hit her and killed her, and the car ran away. My sister and me remembered this story, and we were really spooked. I'm 16 years old right now. If this has any importance, magic was and still is somewhat popular in Libya, especially in family fights with other families and love spells. That is indeed spooky. Ghost child and family when I was a kid. So to start this story off, my mother was Catholic, and my dad, who knows at the time of this story, he never really talked about it. So when this occurred, we lived in Spring, Texas. I was 3 years old. Weirdly enough, I remember life back when I was around 2. So we moved here when I was 1 from Iowa. My dad got a new job and we had some family down the street. So let me start with the details on the house layout, so you can imagine it somewhat better. It was a blue, square-looking house which was quite poor-looking. Old paint, old wood. You walk into the front door and you're in the living room. To the right was a straight shot to the back door past my room and my mom and dad's room. My room had a door that connected the 2 rooms also. And by the back door was the washer and an open attic where you can look up into the attic back there. Okay, now that I explained the layout, when I was 3, I remember I was going outside sometime in the morning. and I looked up on the way out the back door. I'd seen a kid, about 5, I would say. He just had his legs hanging off the ledge in the attic by the back door. We made eye contact, and I remember not being scared, but I was like, who is that? Weird, and just ran out the back door. Moving on to the next. My room freaked me out. When my mom read books to me, I would fall asleep, and she would just head to her room through the connecting door. The night I had the worst feeling, my blanket was pulled down. I remember waking up in the pitch black, looking down, and then right when I looked down, it ripped my whole blanket off of me. Still to this day, I can feel the fear I felt as a child. I screamed so loud as my heart racing, jumped straight out of bed and went to the connecting door to my mom's room, freaking the hell out. But I brought this up to her and she said that she didn't know I had that happen, saying I was just crying and panicking until I passed out asleep. So, when starting this conversation, she told me that she didn't believe in spirits until that house. She told me about nights if my dad was working. He did overnight work. And she would hear someone walking through the wooden kitchen clear as day, telling me that she understood that it's old, the houses creak, right? But the part that made this weirder, the back door would get opened. Easy explanation since the house was old, but the door had 2 deadbolts and 1 chain lock, with the door handle lock as well. And while alone, my mom was just worried about people breaking in. She would lock all of them. And every night, all unlocked and open, and she wouldn't leave the room until it was quiet. She ended up telling my dad, but he didn't believe her until a night that he was off of work and it happened again. He said to my mom, "Do you hear that? Someone's in the house walking through the kitchen." And she just said, "That's what I told you had been happening." He grabbed a bat and ran, opening their door, so that way you can see the kitchen and the back door. No one there. The door was still locked. I was told he looked through the whole house checking locks and windows. No one was there. When they went to sleep and woke up, the back door was wide open, all locks off, nothing stolen, nothing in different places. This is where my parents started getting worried. After this experience, she said that the door still was opening. She was watching TV in the middle of the day, Jerry Springer. She heard the walking and she looked into the kitchen and said that she knew it was walking her way. When the noise stopped, she sighed, but she freaked out when an indentation of someone sitting down in the cushion right next to her appeared. When she jumped up, the spot stayed until she ran by it, and when she looked back, the cushion was slowly raising back up. She said she called a priest to bless the house that day, and said I stopped screaming, but still said I did. I did not want to sleep in that room, and that the door and the walking stopped after that. A doppelganger? I've told this to family and friends, and I'm always given a skeptical look, or it brings chills to their spine. It sounds far-fetched, but honestly, it was as real as it can get for me, and that's all that matters. I was around 10 or 11 at the time, and I was in my old home in Millmont, Pennsylvania. It was after school, and I spent a few hours just gaming on the first-floor living room. It was only me and my older brother home at the time, since my parents worked the second shift until about 11 p.m. It was around 7 or 8 p.m. when I began to crave one of my favorite snacks. I walked in the kitchen, opened some blueberry Pop-Tarts, and sat down at the kitchen table. I was facing away from the living room at the end table. Now, I need to explain the layout so you better understand this. Before entering the kitchen, there's a small archway with no door. It leads straight from the kitchen to the living room, extending to around 2 feet of open space on either side after the archway. From the living room continuing straight, there's a staircase to the left, facing away from kitchen view. I was mid-bite of my Pop-Tart when all of a sudden I began feeling what I can only describe as dread, mixed with the feeling of being watched. I kinda shook it off because of it being so random. It made no sense as to why I felt that way, so I just kept eating. I was a few more small bites in when the feeling intensified, and I only had a gut instinct to turn around. I decided to do so when I should have not. I'm going to try my best to describe the finite details of what I saw. When I turned around, I was immediately focused on 3/4 of a face peeking out completely sideways on the right side of the archway. Now this face was completely solid and not transparent at the least. It was the face of my older brother, Jonathan. His eyes were opened wide, unblinking, and staring directly into my own. His face had an absolute sinister smile, an ear-to-ear smile that was almost too far stretched out to be normal. My brother's skin was normally pale, but this face was an extreme pale. Extremely pale for sure, a few shades lighter, almost like a slightly cream porcelain. The face's eyes were the same color as John's, being bright blue, but it seemed almost glossy. It made no noise and never attempted to speak, it just stared at me, unmoving. Now, I have a condition where I get heart palpitations from a murmur I've had since birth. If I'm surprised or get excited too quickly, I get several quick palpitations. I've had it for as long as I can remember. When I suddenly saw that face, I had to clutch my chest as an immense immediate fear and surprise was causing my heart to palpitate several times. I also got a huge lump in my throat. I couldn't scream, I couldn't yell. I just stared widely back in paralyzed horror. What was around 5 seconds felt more like an eternity. The face then pulled back behind the archway at an angle that you wouldn't think possible. For a few seconds, I was terrified, but then I just began trying to rationally think of what I saw in an attempt to pull myself back to earth. In my own mind, I knew it was my brother. It's just his features were a bit oblong, and that smile was more sinister than anything I've ever seen before. I was already used to him pranking me on a weekly basis, so I convinced myself that it was another one of his stupid pranks. I thought to myself that I can also sneak to the archway myself and scare him back, since he didn't walk back to the living room. I knew he was just hiding on the right side of the archway. So I slowly and silently got up from the chair and sneaked my way to the right side of the archway from the kitchen. I reached the edge of it, waited a few seconds, and then jumped out and yelled, "Boo!" However, to my confusion, there was nothing there. There was no way that my brother could have moved away from that position without me seeing, as that part of the hall only came out about 2 feet. I still had visible access to the rest of the living room from the kitchen. I was in shock and confusion when all of a sudden I hear quick walking coming from the staircase on the left side of the living room. I slowly turned towards the staircase and looked up at the sight of my older brother looking back at me with a confused expression. "Dude, who the hell are you yelling at?" my brother said as he peeked over the stair rail at me. He was 13 at the time. I was just in utter shock. I tried to make out words, but I just couldn't. My lip was only quivering. I instead just turned back around, went back into the kitchen, sat down at the kitchen table again, just staring into my Pop-Tarts for about a minute or two. My brother came down the stairs and into the kitchen, and saw the blank look on my face and pressed on his questions. I told him everything that I saw, and he somehow believed me. Maybe due to the fear and panic I had when he first saw my face. I was researching online what could have been possible there. I've only been pointed to what is known as a doppelganger. But I saw that they're an exact copy of a living person. And that thing was very close to being exact, but it wasn't 100%. I would say 90% at best. With that stretched smile and the skin tone. Also, my research showed that they're not sinister or evil, but can be a sign of bad luck. But I swear the only feeling I got off of it was dread and a sense of sinister evil. I never saw it again after that day. I wouldn't have told anyone if my wife had not seen it as well. It was July 19th, 2016. I remember the date because we had our annual Christmas in July at my in-laws. And it was a crazy full moon. We had left to head home. We took the back way. We live in a somewhat rural area, so the back way is very dark. No traffic at that time of night, and the speed limit is 60 kilometers an hour. As we're driving along, it's about 5 minutes from home. Out of the corner of my eye towards the forest on the passenger side, I catch a glimpse of something moving fast. The moment my foot hits the brakes, my wife's hand grabs my leg. Getting goosebumps as I type this, as it was a crazy experience. We come to a screeching halt in the road, and whatever it was stopped dead in front of us. It cocked its head to look at us. We both at the time said, "Do you see that?" It was huge. Best guess 7 feet tall. It had yellow eyes that glowed from the headlights. And it was muscular and skinny at the same time. The most memorable feature, though, were its legs. It 100% looked like a dog walking upright, with the cocked angle in its legs. No sooner did it stop and glare at us did it continue to bolt across the road and vanish into the forest on my driver's side. The only way that we've ever been able to describe it was werewolf-like. And like I said, my wife and I both agreed. If we had not both witnessed it, I'd have called myself crazy and never mentioned it. But we both saw it. No question about it. Ghost? Werewolf? No idea, but whatever it was huge, mean-looking, and fast. Ghost trying to make contact with me. Long story. I had some crazy experiences when my family and I moved into our new house. I was 8 years old. The first time I noticed something wrong was the day when I was playing with my new RC car. I played with it in the living room for a few minutes, then took a break to use the computer. I left the controller with the toy car behind me. I then started hearing an odd sound that was happening in bursts. It sounded like a small power tool coming from beneath the house. I sat there confused, looking around, but it stopped. A few minutes later, I heard it again. I turned around and noticed that the long antenna on the RC car was wiggling back and forth. The sound was the car moving by itself. Then there was a time not too long after that, I had another odd experience, and the thought of this one still makes me uncomfortable. One day I was in the family room watching TV. There was a computer swivel chair to my slight left in the room. Suddenly, the chair slowly turned and faced me. It wasn't like the chair had slightly turned. It made a good, decent-sized turn. What's even more odd is that that room is known for having an uneven surface, whereas the floor is at a slight slant. The chair swiveled up against the slant towards me. A few months go by, and there was a day when I had family come over and visit. It was at night, and my family was in the family room across the house. I was watching TV with my brother in his room, with the TV to my left and the doorway to the hall in front of me from where I sat. He told me he was going to be hanging out with the family, and I told him I would join as soon as the episode finished. He leaves and I enjoy my time. But a few minutes go by, and I start noticing something. The doorway is in front of me, and it's dark with no light, and when I look at the TV, I can see the doorway from the corner of my eye. As I'm watching TV, I seem to notice a human-like figure standing in the dark doorway. I immediately turned my head and saw nothing there. I figure it's just my eyes playing tricks on me. I go back to looking at the TV, and suddenly I see this figure again. But this time I wait slightly longer before turning to directly look at it. I noticed it was shaped like a woman who was wearing a dress, but no details other than a white shape. I look and it disappears. And at this point, I'm kind of freaking out, but I'm trying to convince myself it's not real. I turn to face the TV once more, and the figure reappears, but this time it's moving. Her hands and arms making a shape, making some gesture. After that, I bolted out of the room and ran to my family. After that experience, I still wasn't 100% sure if what I saw was real, and a few weeks went by. One night, I was hanging out with my sister in her room. Out the doorway of her room, you can see the doorway into my room on the immediate right. We were talking and joking around until something caught my eye. There was a shadow of what seemed to look like the bottom of a dress on the floor in my room, with the rest of the figure being hidden by the edge of the doorway. It looked like the bottom of a window curtain slightly swaying in the wind. Then it moved up, out of my eye's view around the corner of the doorway. I immediately went into my room to check if it was empty. I had no curtains, nor anything fabric that could cause that shadow. I went back to my sister's room and told her what I saw. She didn't really take it seriously and brushed over the topic. Soon after, she looked at me concerned and told me, "Man, you really did see something, huh?" She said that my face was extremely pale. Finally, about a year goes by. One morning I awoke. I opened my bedroom door and my sister came up to me with a deep concern on her face. I ask her what's wrong. She begins to tell me the story of what happened overnight while I was sleeping. She tells me that in the middle of the night, she heard what sounded like our mom outside the hallway, softly calling out my name, "James." My sister found this unusual and called my mom via cell phone to ask if it was her. My mom awoke with a groggy voice saying it wasn't her and that she's asleep in her room. My sister got freaked out and went to my mom's room where she slept the rest of the night. Later on in the same night, my grandmother and grandfather, who live in the back house, went to my mom's room and woke up my mom and sister. They said that they heard a woman crying and screaming in the backyard. After hearing that story, it was like it confirmed everything that I had experienced. Mind you that I kept most of these experiences to myself, didn't share them much. That was the end of it for a while. Never heard or saw anything for years. But there was one last experience. It was 2011, and I was all grown up now, still living in my mom's house. One morning I woke up and went to the living room and began opening the blinds on the window to let the light in. As I'm opening the blinds, I hear my mom calling out for me from across the house. I told her to give me a second as I finished opening up the blinds. I walked to the family room where I heard her, and she's not there. I assume she went back into her room, and I check. Not there either. I then checked my grandparents' house. She's not there, and not in the grandparents' house. I went back to the living room and looked out the window, and I realized that all my family's cars are gone. I was home alone. I called my mom to further confirm that she wasn't home, in fact, and she indeed was not. The voice I had heard calling my name was as clear as day. Didn't even question it in the slightest. That was the last time I came in contact with what seemed to be a woman who had interest in me. I'm not a religious man. Rather, I am a man of science and reasoning, always trying to pick out possibilities before jumping to conclusions. But everything I'd experienced leaves me puzzled. Everything you read actually happened. And even if, I guess even I'm having trouble believing it sometimes, it's simply overwhelming. My imaginary friend Charlie. Back when I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Charlie. From what I remember, Charlie was around from the time I was about 4 years old up until I was 9, when my family moved to a different house. So I spent 5 years talking and playing with Charlie. My parents encouraged it because I didn't have any real friends or siblings, and it wasn't uncommon for a lonely kid to create an imaginary friend to play with. I was a loner, and still very much am today. Charlie told me that he used to live in my house before my family moved in. I believed him, because we often played hide and seek, and he knew all of the best hiding spots. He knew things about the house that even I didn't know at that time. A couple of times I asked him where his parents were and why they didn't live in the house with him, and he never gave me an answer. After a year or so, he started asking me to do strange things, like stealing change from my mom's purse, or hiding my dad's car keys so he wouldn't be late for work, or so he would be late for work. Random mischievous stuff like that. When I refused, his requests became much more sinister, telling me to push my mom down the stairs, start a fire in my parents' bedroom. Of course, I again refused. Charlie became more cold, and instead of wanting to play, he only suggested doing things to hurt me or my parents. I was scared of him. I never told my parents what he said, only that I didn't want to play with him anymore. When we moved out of that house, I didn't bring Charlie with me. I forgot about him for many years, until a few days ago, when my mother asked me if I remembered having an imaginary friend growing up. That's when all of this started to come back to me. I did some research into this history of this old house, and found that there was indeed a young boy named Charles whose family lived in the house about 15 years before mine, and apparently died at a young age, but I couldn't find any info as to how or where he died. Stories from my old house. I'm currently 18, and I've been living in my house for, I'd say, about 8 years now. My family, which includes at the time my 2 sisters and my mother, moved in with my Nana because of a few reasons I wouldn't want to bore you with. But for the first 10 years of my life, we lived in a house where so many unexplained things happened. Even since us moving, a few horrible things have happened there, which I won't go into detail about, possibly later. Firstly, This was before I was born, and when I was a newborn. My elder sister, who was 3 when I was born, had a friend that she played with in the house. She described her as a skinny, blonde-haired girl. She distinctly remembers her having a mole on her left cheek. My sister is also blonde, so when my mother saw a young blonde girl dash past her doorway, she would assume it was my sister. Only until she realized that my sister was in the same room as her. My sister would just blabber on about her friend to my mother quite frequently, saying how much she liked to play with her. Another time, my mother was asleep on the couch. She said it was around 9 or 10 at night when she was awoken suddenly by a man she'd never seen before screaming her name in her face. She still says it was the most terrified she's ever been, and has called the police as well as my dad, who's at work at the time, to come home. The house was searched, but no sign of anyone. There was even times where my mother would lose her keys or phone or whatever, check somewhere, for example, the kitchen side. They wouldn't be there. She'd go look somewhere else and then come back into the kitchen to find whatever she was looking for sat in a place she'd already searched. In my own experience at that house, I'd hear tapping on the walls, footsteps. But I'm a person who thinks rationally and logically, so I pass these off. Yeah, I can't explain my personal experiences, but not as clueless as to immediately say that it was something paranormal. I agree, Gecko. A few years back, however, my mother got a message on Facebook from the people who moved in after we left, asking if anything weird happened there when we lived at the house. So some weird stuff must have happened to them too. It's pretty depressing because everyone in my family has some memory of that something strange was happening at that old house apart from me. Well, if you don't count the tapping and the footsteps. But being in the house did feel unsettling. And I even thought of the idea of cold spots and a haunted place as a bit of a cliche, but there would be times where you'd suddenly feel cold. Deceased family members saying one last goodbye. Now, before I continue the stories, I'm going to recite that they might not have occurred exactly how I described them, since both of the stories I'm going to tell happened when I was pretty young. Nevertheless, here are 2 stories that didn't happen to me, but happened to both my grandmother and my sister. Back in 2006, my granddad passed away, and at the time I would have been 4, but as someone who has a terrible memory, I can still remember him pretty well. When he passed away, it hit everyone pretty hard, and my Nan, for the first time in her life, now lived by herself. My Nan used to have a queen-sized bed, which essentially had bedside tables connected to it, as well as a headrest which was big enough to hold pictures and small ornaments. So basically it was pretty big. On the 2 bedside tables, there were 2 huge lamps, which turned on and off whenever you touched the lamp itself. It didn't have a switch. One night, not too long after my granddad passes away, my Nan was just laying in bed when the lamp next to where my granddad would sleep lit up and then turned off. She brushed it off as something possibly leaning up against the lamp, but then it happened again, so she was understandably pretty spooked. She decided to ask if it was my granddad, and the lamp turned on. My Nan began to cry, began to say various different things, and she was getting a response as the lamp turned on and off. She recorded it happening, but considering it was 2006, and I'm unsure what she even recorded it on, I've never seen the footage, but both my mom and Nan for both said that it exists. In the unlikely event that it ever gets found, I'm definitely 100% posting it. As a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I hoped that it would possibly make me into a believer. Around 2011, my gran passed away, and at the time, she was not in a position both physically and financially to live on her own. So she lived with my dad right up until she passed away. My parents split when I was really young, so when we would go to see him, I would sleep in his room, which was pretty big enough for an extra bed, and my sisters slept in another room. But when my gran passed, my older sister slept in her room from then on. One day she opened the door to go to sleep, only to find my gran sat on the edge of the bed. I clearly remember her running into my dad's room in tears, screaming, saying that she saw my gran. I remember my dad trying to calm her down, and when he went into the room himself, he saw nothing. My sister was terrified of going back in there and subsequently didn't spend weekends at my dad's for a very long time. I'm both grateful but also pretty annoyed that I've never encountered anything like this. It probably really shit me up. I'm the sort of person who hates horror films, so I'd rather not have an experience like this, but then again, I always brush off stories because I myself have never experienced anything relatable in any way.